I was able to force out how I had just met God. And I collapsed on the floor. I was physically just spent at that moment. Denise, my wife, she jumped out of bed and she ran around and got down beside me on the floor. She was very concerned. She was looking at me and trying to figure out what was going on. And I didn't want to be able to, I couldn't focus on that. What was going on inside of me was just so powerful. I had just been with Jesus. And that was all I could think about. Everything that was, all of the details from everything that had just transpired leading up to this point where I was back in my body again was just flooding through me. And the experience of the love of God was just so overwhelming to me. It was hard for me to even try to be able to focus back in this body, in this reality. It was so confining. It was like, I don't know, it was like my entire soul had been wrapped in duct tape. I was just felt like suddenly that freedom and peace and openness and expansiveness, all of that I had been experiencing in a realm that is so hyper real in comparison. I'm suddenly put in a tiny little box, and the reality that I was now experiencing, suddenly the reality of this physical life, it was so much more clear to me, because now everything that I had experienced was now so much less. This earthly realm, this earthly life, it is a blessing. It is a blessing to be able to have that. But it is a shadow in comparison to the ultimate reality for those that are in heaven with Jesus. I just can't explain it any other way. I know, I do not question anymore that this life, it's hard. It's very hard. It's very hard. But what we have to look forward to when we either are raptured alive or through physical death, it doesn't mean anything other than that transition to be going back home and sharing an awesome reality that does not end with our Lord and Savior, with the God of all creation. That just makes the reality of this life, as hard as it is, to really pale by comparison. Suddenly it's not that tough. And we know that it's going to end. So all these things are going through my mind. It's just racing through my mind. Denise, she's just wanting to be able to say, she's trying to figure out, first off, how on earth did I get out in the middle of the floor Why was I on the ground? What? And so my focus then, I'm trying to be able to focus on Denise. It's difficult to do. But I have to tell her. I then spent on the ground. I couldn't move. I'm sitting there on the ground, and she is on her knees beside me as I relate everything that had happened. Every point that led back up to where she is then beside me right now. And then you could just see the concern in her face. She realized that, and she said, "I think you've had a heart attack, Wayne. We've got to get you to the hospital." And the reason why she would have said that, and it doesn't seem, you think like, well, wait a minute. When you're looking at my age, I'm right at 27 years old. It just does not seem particularly normal that a 27-year-old man in really good shape is suddenly going to have this massive widowmaker heart attack and die. Except that my wife Denise knew about my mother, who had had her first major heart attack at 27. And she had several more, but that was just something, I just never thought that something like that might happen to me. But it made more sense to me. But regardless of that, she was so concerned about me, and I said, baby, I just can't. I don't have the strength to be able to go right now. And she looked at me with this concern, and she said, "But, honey, what if you have another one and you die for good this time?" And I just looked at her and I smiled and I said, "Baby, Jesus is not going to send me back just to have me die again." And she thought about it for a moment, and she looked at me, and although she was still concerned, she said, "Okay." I said, "I'll tell you what. If the clinic is not going to open until 8 o'clock, and I need to get a couple of hours of rest." It was late at that time. I seem to recall it was between 4 and 6 o'clock in the morning. And so what I needed to be able to do was to try to get some strength so I could get myself to there. I didn't want to call the ambulance or anything like that, but I did want to be able to go to the doctor for everyone else's sake. I didn't want to appear foolish, but I was pretty sure there was nothing that was going to happen to me. And so she agreed, and she said, "Okay." So she laid next to me then on the bed as I tried to be able to get some rest. Interestingly, she didn't have her back turned to me this time. She was facing me. She was really concerned from this point. She puts her arm around me to hold on to me, and it was just so cute. And but I was able to go to sleep, and for about an hour and a half, and then I was starting to rouse myself to try to get some strength, slowly get ready to be able to drive to the clinic. And of course, the moment that my eyes open back up, it's everything that happened to me. Everything that happened to me. I'm just on fire. There's just something that I have got to tell everybody. Everybody's got to know this. I can't keep from it. the very first moment that I come back, I have to tell Denise, the first person I see. And so it's funny now that I think about it now, but at the time, I was not going to let anybody stop me. I was going to tell every person I came into contact with what just happened to me. So here I actually make it to the clinic, and I walk in, and then I go to the receptionist, and there's this young lady. She's there at the desk, and she has a book, and she's finishing up writing up notes, I think, from the person that was just right before me. And so she stops and she looks up and she smiles and she says, "How can we help you?" And I looked at her and I said, "I died last night and I met God. I need to have myself checked out." And she looks at me like this and she says, "Okay." And she says, "So what happened?" And I said, "I think I had a heart attack, and my wife asked me to come in and to get checked out. So if my doctor could to do that, I would appreciate it." And she said, "Yeah, I think we need to do that." But what happens then is what's really interesting. As she's writing this down, she's putting me in the book, she's setting it up for the doctor to be able to see me. She starts asking me about it. "Do you mind if I ask you? What happened? Did you see anything?" She just opened that door wide open. And so, of course, I was happy to tell her everything that I could. I stood there and I made sure as well that I was speaking loud enough for everyone in the waiting room that was there at that time to also hear at the same time. And you could see heads from people in the waiting room as they go. They're looking over. I wanted everyone to know. And so then within just, I don't know, it wasn't too long. I knew that I wouldn't have a lot of time to be able to talk to them, because once they had determined that there was an issue with my heart, they were going to be out there pretty quick. And so the nurse comes out and goes, "Mr. Fowler, can you come back quickly, please?" And so I come back, and the nurse who is bringing me back, she has to do my initial vitals, weigh me, all those kinds of things. And she said, "I couldn't help but hear you out there. Did you say that you had died?" And I said, "Yes." And very matter-of-factly to her, as she's measuring my height and she's weighing on the scale, and I'm saying, "Yeah, I died and I met Jesus. He's real. He is God. And I'm happy to tell you about it if you would like to hear." And she said, "Yeah, I'd like to hear that." So then they get me back, start to assign me to a particular room to be able to go in and wait for the doctor. Well, I didn't go into that room. I went to the front desk, or the desk that's there at the back there. And there are several nurses that are waiting there. And I thought, I'll tell them too. So I started telling them. And again, I'm speaking loud enough so that everyone back there and the people in the front who are wanting to hear more of this can hear me. And so my doctor comes around and he said, tell me about what's going on." And he said, "Well, wait a minute. Before we do that, do you mind if I bring my PA in, my physician's assistant?" And I said, No, I'm happy to have her in here as well, because, Doctor, you are going to be amazed at what has happened to me. And I proceed to lay out the whole story from the beginning, explaining all about everything about what I was feeling the day, how it led up to this, and everything else. And I went through this, and let me tell you, the doctor listened to the whole story. He was not going anywhere. And at the end, he said, there's a couple of things that I would like to be able to do. He said, first, I want to be able to, I need to draw your blood. There's some tests that we can do to be able to determine whether you had a heart attack. I want to go ahead and get an electrocardiogram test done on you. I want to be able to do a stress test to find out how strong your heart is and various other little things. So he was obviously concerned that there was an issue with my heart, but he was very intrigued. And with the continuation that as he goes out and he's trying to be able to arrange all of the tests, the PA who is then sitting there, she said, do you mind if I stay and ask you a few questions? I said, no, I'm happy to answer anything you have. So she starts asking more questions, and I am happy to tell her everything that I know. So I'm there for a while. I get the blood test done. I have the other test done, the stress test and everything else, all of that type of thing. He's wanting to do the blood test as an urgency to be able to see what the markers are. And it was probably about a half hour, I'm guessing, after he has ordered the test. He comes in and he's got his hands crossed like this, and he's walking in and he's got this big smile on his face. And he says, well, Mr. Fowler, tests show that you've had a major heart attack. And he said, but the other tests seem to show there's absolutely nothing wrong with your heart. And I just looked at him and I smiled and I just shook my head. And so that's what it did. I said, is there anything else that you would like for me to be able to do, doctor? And he said, you know what? He said, just be careful. That was quite an amazing story that you told. And he said, and I believe it. I said, I'm glad that you do, because it's all true. Maybe you have a story to tell all of your colleagues. And with that, I left. I should note that that doctor had become our family doctor, and he had remained with us treating for years and years. And then ultimately, we're still in connection on a friendship basis, as well, of course, as a professional basis, as needed as a doctor. But I'll tell you that from that moment, I have not stopped telling everyone about the love of Jesus, about the truth of Jesus, about the coming of Jesus. The good thing is that I came back with this urgency, this sense of purpose. One driving thing that was in me was that I knew that his coming, his return, was so soon. And I knew that because of that, I wanted to find out everything in His Word. I wanted to find out where all of those things were that we had discussed, the things that He had shown me, the questions that He had answered. While I had known all of the answers completely at that time, when I was in His presence, when I was in my spiritual body, when I came back, there was this need, and I think it was by design, of course, for me to search His Word. And I had a voracious appetite for His Word. One, because I knew it was true. And two, the answers that I sought were in there. And so I couldn't stop reading it. I read it from cover to cover. And I was noting it. I was making notes, and I was going like, oh yes, that's what he means here, and that sort of thing. And so much knowledge, so much building, and I felt so close and connected with Him. But I felt at the same time, and I'm so glad that I have had that connection since, I really had a tough time. It is difficult having been in heaven with Jesus and then having to come back into this life. I felt so homesick. I was so homesick. I longed to be back there. But at the same time, I recognized that I'm here for a purpose. And I came to realize what that purpose was. That in the sea of near-death experiences that are cropping up almost like mushrooms now, if you pardon it, I wanted to be able to tell people. I wanted to be able to let others know. I wanted to let people know the truth of it. And that was one of the reasons why He sent me back, because I would tell people. And not in a superficial way. I had experienced this very detailed experience with my death, the whole thing. And I have related and continue to relate that depth and detail about it. I was asked, and some people do ask, well, what do you think about other people that have had experiences like yours, or maybe even ones that have had different ones, or those persons that may have had experiences with hell and those types of things. And this is what I would say about that. This is what I've recognized. There is a common thread that I see through a lot of these. I note that there are a number of people who have had near-death experiences, and they were either not a Christian, not a believer. Maybe they were an atheist even. Maybe they were agnostic. There's a lot of things that have happened. And even with those people who don't believe in an afterlife, who don't believe that there's a continuation of existence, who don't believe in Jesus or God, the one thing that I seem to be finding that's consistent through that is they find out that all of those things are true. An afterlife is real. Jesus is real. Continuation of life is real. And in fact, that continuation of life is more real than this life. One of the other things, though, that concerns me about it, I mentioned in my experience in this first part, is that when you die, you're the same person, the same personality after that death, after that transition from physical life to spiritual life. That because you're that same person, I don't find that a lot of people are necessarily changed or impacted by the experience in a way that makes them think, oh, well, if Jesus is real, then maybe everything that he said or everything said about him, everything that we have on him and his own words, maybe that's just as real. Maybe when he talks about hell, maybe when he talks about heaven, maybe when he talks about sin and repentance and all of that, maybe that is real too. And I'm here to tell you, I know it's true. And I am going to say and hold fast to that because I know that truth. And I'm going to tell everybody about it. For those that have had NDEs, yes, it is a life-changing experience in the sense that most everyone, I'm not afraid to die. Because I've already done it. I'm okay, been there, done that. But I am concerned for those people who, having had the experience, do not, in my estimation, really see how the impact of not finding out more about Jesus or to finding out more about God. They know it's God, it's their creator. Wouldn't you want to know more about him? Not everybody, I guess, does. But I want to make sure that the message gets out there. I want to make sure that the message of Jesus gets out there. When it all comes down to it, as I said, the answer to all of the questions is Jesus. And that is what I'm going to continue to tell everyone. Hopefully, I'm going to continue doing that until he returns and splits the sky and calls us up there with that rapture trumpet. If you have any questions, I'm just saying, call out to Jesus. He's that close, and he will answer.